Hello to each one of you. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm covering 7 fatal chimpanzee attacks. From a woman who provoked an already agitated chimpanzee, to a cleaner who was working alone when a chimpanzee got out and wrapped its hands around her throat. It was July 29, 2020. A small private primate sanctuary sat on the edge of a rural county, run by a skeleton crew on a tight budget and a genuine love for the animals in their care. They opened to the public only a few times each month, offering small, supervised visits. Sign a waiver, follow the rules, and you got a rare chance to see these animals up close. Cheryl Ann Grewley was 54 years old, a retired office manager who had signed up for the sanctuary tour, looking for something a little different to do that morning. She arrived as part of a paid group tour with 8 visitors, and staff noticed the problem almost immediately. At check-in, she complained that the waiver was too long, the rules were unnecessary, and the no-touch policy was excessive. Most of us have met someone like Cheryl at some point, someone who seems to take the existence of rules as a personal challenge. Usually, that just makes someone difficult to deal with. Here, it made her dangerous. The facility housed 4 adult chimpanzees in reinforced steel bar enclosures, each panel bolted into a concrete frame. The dominant male, a 26-year-old chimp weighing roughly 135 pounds, had been agitated since morning feeding. Staff had noted the behavior before the tour even arrived. He was already in a bad mood. As the group made its way through the viewing area, Cheryl received her first verbal warning for standing too close to the barrier. She brushed it off. A few minutes later came a second warning. Same result. Then she moved closer still, tapped the steel panel twice with her knuckles. Not hard, not dramatically, just enough to get a reaction, and held his gaze. Staff were already heading in her direction when the panel shifted. One of the lower enclosure panels was missing a bolt, and staff had reported movement in the frame 6 days earlier. A maintenance request had been submitted and logged. It was still waiting to be addressed. After several impacts during an agitation display, the weakened mounting points finally gave way. Cheryl still didn't back away. I don't understand. Was she trying to prove a point? Because if she was, this was a terrible place to do it. He reached through and grabbed her left forearm with both hands and pulled. Cheryl went down hard, dragged toward the base of the panel. Weighing 336 pounds, she would have struggled to regain her footing even under normal circumstances. In the middle of an active chimp attack, it was impossible. The biting started immediately, left hand first, then up the forearm. Within the first minute, 3 fingers on her left hand were gone at the second knuckle. She reached down with her right hand, trying to push him off, and he seized that one too, biting into the palm and across the wrist. She was on the ground now, partially through the gap. He pulled her closer, and the biting moved to her left shoulder, then her upper arm. She was still moving at that point, trying to pull back, trying to get leverage, but the blood loss was already significant, and her movements were slowing. At some point in that window, she stopped responding entirely. Not a decision, just the body reaching its limit. Staff could not intervene safely for approximately 4 minutes. The animal was still active, still at the gap. When they finally managed to separate her, she was unconscious on the ground. Emergency responders were called immediately. She was transported and died en route to the nearest medical facility. The coroner listed exsanguination as the cause of death. Blood loss from multiple traumatic wounds across both hands, both forearms, and the left shoulder. Contributing factors included the delay in separation, a pre-existing cardiovascular condition, and the extent of the injuries. Evidence recovered at the scene included visitor logs, staff reports, security footage, and the maintenance request that had been sitting on file for 6 days without action. The sanctuary suspended public visiting hours following the incident and conducted a full structural review of all enclosure panels. She came in arguing and left in an ambulance, and somehow every step in between felt completely avoidable. Across the country, a woman who had surrendered her own chimpanzee years earlier tracked it down and paid for the chance to see if the bond still held. It was March 4th, 2019. A rural property in a sparsely populated county housed a makeshift animal enclosure inside a converted equipment shed. Chain link walls, corrugated metal roof, no licensing, no oversight. The property belonged to a private exotic animal broker who took in paying visitors on request and operated entirely outside of any regulatory framework. Violet Alisher was 47 years old. She had spent 11 years raising a male chimpanzee on her rural property, shaping much of her life around his care. When state inspectors forced her to surrender the animal, he was relocated, and Violet was left trying to adjust to the absence. 4 years later, she was still looking. She found the broker through a private exotic animal network, the kind of community that operates mostly through word of mouth and closed online groups. He had recently acquired a 22-year-old male chimpanzee, weighing 128 pounds, and for the right price, he would let people spend time near the animal. There was no paperwork to sign, no formal orientation, and no real safety briefing. Violet paid without hesitation. She arrived that morning carrying a bag of fruit she had packed herself. Bananas, grapes, a few other favorites. The same kinds of things she used to bring her own chimp. She told the broker she had years of experience. 11, to be exact. Personally, I think she put far too much weight on that fact. The chimp she had known for 11 years was gone. This animal was a stranger. The broker led her into the shed and opened the enclosure door. He stayed near the entrance, lingering by the frame, while Violet stepped farther inside. She approached the chimp slowly, speaking to him in a calm, familiar voice. The chimp watched her, but there was nothing in his reaction to suggest recognition or interest. To him, she was just another person. Then the vocalizing started. Low sounds at first, followed by short, repetitive bursts. His body was tense. His movements were stiff. Violet saw an animal getting used to her presence, the way her own chimp often had after time apart. She believed she understood what she was looking at, so she took another step forward and offered a piece of fruit. The chimp ignored it. What happened next took only a few seconds. There was no long display of aggression and no dramatic warning. From about 8 feet away, the chimp suddenly charged. The first bite landed high on Violet's scalp as the chimp collided with her. She lost her footing and crashed backward onto the hard-packed floor. She didn't stumble or try to catch herself. She simply went down. The chimp remained on her, biting and pulling at her scalp and the back of her head before the broker, who had been waiting just outside the enclosure, managed to grab her by the arms and drag her clear. The broker had no medical training. He pressed a folded tarp against her head to slow the bleeding and went outside the property to call for help. There was no reliable signal inside the shed. Violet was still breathing when responders arrived, but she never regained consciousness. She was airlifted to a medical facility and died 6 hours later. Nearly all of the injuries were concentrated on her head and scalp. Large sections of scalp had been torn away, and extensive trauma was present across the crown and back of the head. There were no significant wounds to her arms or hands, and no defensive injuries. She never had the chance to put them up. That's the detail that changes the whole story for me. Not a fight, but a sudden collision between expectation and reality. The coroner ruled the death a traumatic brain injury associated with blunt force head trauma sustained during the attack. Severe scalp avulsion and extensive cranial soft tissue injuries were listed as contributing factors. Investigators cited the lack of safety protocols, the unlicensed nature of the operation, and Violet's decision to enter the enclosure. The chimp was removed and transferred to a secure sanctuary. The broker later faced administrative penalties related to the operation of the facility, though no criminal charges were filed in connection with Violet's death. Violet spent 4 years trying to find her way back to something that had already moved on without her. On a guided walk through a semi-wild reserve, a solo traveler stepped off the marked path and ended up in the middle of a subadult male's resting ground. It was September 11, 2014. A small eco-tour company offered guided walks through a reserve that bordered chimpanzee habitat. The rules were straightforward. Stay on the marked path, stay with the group, and don't wander. Every guide carried a radio and an emergency protocol card just in case. Johanna Delacour was 38 years old. a librarian from a mid-sized city in the Northeast. She had spent 2 years saving for this trip, a 3-week solo journey through a part of the world she had wanted to visit since her 20s. She had no wildlife experience and knew the reserve only through the tour brochure. Quiet, polite, and attentive, she made little impression on the group that morning. Later, the guide would describe her as one of the easiest visitors he'd ever taken along that route. After spending time with someone like Cheryl Grewley, Johanna almost sounds refreshing. She wasn't looking for any trouble, just someone who wanted to enjoy the tour. About 2 hours into the walk, Johanna needed to use the restroom. She didn't say anything at first. As the only solo traveler in the group, she didn't want to be the person who slowed everyone down. By the time she finally pulled the guide aside, he pointed her toward a spot just off the trail, 20 feet at most, just beyond the first line of brush. The brush didn't offer as much privacy as she wanted, and the vegetation grew thicker with every step. Moving carefully through the undergrowth, she had no idea she was approaching an area regularly used by the local chimpanzees. At roughly 83 feet beyond the trail boundary, Johanna heard movement in the brush to her left. She stopped and looked. A young male chimp emerged from the vegetation, vocalizing in short, sharp bursts. His body was low to the ground, his hair fully raised. To someone familiar with chimp behavior, those were obvious warning signs. To Johanna, they meant nothing. She had never encountered a wild animal behaving like this and had no idea what she was supposed to do. She froze. Instinct took over. The chimp screamed and charged from about 10 feet away. Johanna turned to run, but she never had a chance. He covered the distance in seconds and struck her from behind with enough force to knock her completely off her feet. She hit the ground face first. The chimp grabbed the back of her head and slammed it into the soil. Then again, and again, then a 4th time. The ground beneath her head showed 4 separate compression marks from the impacts. After the 2nd strike, whatever fight she had left was gone. The chimp remained nearby for about 2 minutes before wandering back into the brush on his own. Back on the trail, the guide waited several minutes before becoming concerned. He called out to Johanna twice and received no response. After radioing for assistance, he followed the path she had taken into the vegetation. He found her 11 minutes after she had left the group. She was lying face down and had no pulse. Of the 3 stories so far, this is the one that bothers me most, because there was no confidence, no recklessness, no bad intentions behind it. Just bad luck. Responders arrived shortly afterward and confirmed she was dead. The coroner ruled the death a traumatic brain injury caused by bilateral temporal fractures, an occipital fracture at the base of the skull, and brainstem damage consistent with repeated high-force impacts against the ground. Death was estimated to have occurred within minutes. There were no defensive wounds on her hands or arms, indicating she had little chance to react after the initial attack. Investigators documented boot prints 83 feet beyond the trail boundary, impact depressions in the soil, and the guide's radio log. Johanna's belongings were found undisturbed at the edge of the trail. It was the quietest, most ordinary mistake imaginable. Miles away, a woman hired purely to translate walked into her 3rd day on a research job, completely unaware that nobody had thought to tell her what to do if the chimps stopped being calm. It was June 3rd, 2020. A small behavioral research team had set up a temporary camp along the edge of a semi-wild chimpanzee habitat. For nearly 2 weeks, 3 researchers had been observing and recording movement patterns and social behavior from a distance. On the 13th day, they brought in outside help. Aday's Holmgren was 31 years old, a freelance interpreter fluent in 4 languages. Her work often took her into remote and challenging environments, so unfamiliar situations didn't usually bother her. The research team hired her to help communicate with a nearby local community. She arrived on the 13th day, received a briefing on communication procedures, and little else. There was no animal safety orientation and no emergency training. By the 3rd hour of the observation session, the team had drifted closer to the chimp cluster than their own protocol allowed. Standing near the back of the group, Adayz started noticing things that felt off. The chimps were behaving differently than they had earlier. The group had tightened, and low vocalizations kept coming from the far side of the cluster. She couldn't have explained exactly why, but the atmosphere had changed. Years of working in unfamiliar places had taught her to trust that feeling. This time, she deferred to the people around her instead. She almost spoke up several times, but never quite did. She had been on the job for 3 days and was there to interpret, not evaluate animal behavior. If the researchers weren't concerned, why should she be? It seemed like a reasonable decision at the time. As it turned out, the researchers had noticed it too, just not as quickly. By the time the lead researcher finally called for a retreat, the atmosphere had already changed. The signal to retreat was clear. The problem was that Adaise had never been told what retreating was supposed to look like. The researchers split off in different directions, a standard response intended to keep the group from bunching up, and for a brief moment she hesitated, trying to figure out who she was supposed to follow. That moment was enough. A large adult male broke from the cluster and charged straight at her. Adaise turned sideways and dropped into a crouch, a purely instinctive reaction to something large moving toward her at speed. Instead of backing away, she unintentionally presented her side. The chimp never slowed. The bite landed high on her inner right thigh. Single contact, deep, and the chimp released and pulled back toward the cluster within seconds. Adaise went down immediately. She never fully regained her footing after the impact. The wound was deep, and the bleeding was unlike anything that could be managed with bare hands and a folded jacket. But that was all they had. The bite had torn deep into the upper thigh, partially severing the femoral artery. The bleeding was immediate and severe. Without proper equipment to control it, blood loss can become fatal within minutes. 2 researchers applied direct pressure, while the third tried to reach emergency services from a location with no reliable signal. There was no medical kit, no tourniquet. The nearest evacuation point was more than an hour away. Adaise lost consciousness within minutes. She died before any evacuation could be organized. It's hard not to think about the conversation she never had. A single sentence at the right moment might have changed the rest of the day. The coroner listed exsanguination as the cause of death, citing a deep upper thigh bite wound, partial femoral artery laceration, and massive blood loss. Contributing factors included the lack of medical equipment, the remote location of the camp, and the fact that Adaise had never received an animal safety briefing or emergency orientation. Investigators reviewed statements from all 3 researchers, GPS records showing the group's proximity to the chimp cluster, and camp documentation. The interpreter hiring file contained no safety waiver, no orientation checklist, and no emergency contact protocol. She was hired to translate words, not to read animals, and that distinction ended up costing her everything. At a small rescue facility in central Georgia, a volunteer who knew every animal by name was in the wrong place when a 4-day conflict between 2 adult males finally erupted. It was February 19, 2017. A small non-profit primate rescue facility on the outskirts of a mid-sized city housed 8 chimpanzees across 3 connected enclosures. The building was old, the budget was tight, and a small staff relied heavily on volunteers to keep things running. Maintenance requests moved slowly. There was always something more urgent. Greta Lou Pullman was 61 years old, a retired physical therapist. She had volunteered at the facility for 3 years, showing up every week without fail. She knew the animals by name, tracked their moods, and regularly passed behavioral observations along to staff. She wasn't an employee and had no authority over operations, but she knew those chimpanzees as well as anyone there. In a lot of ways, Greta was exactly the kind of volunteer every rescue hopes to find. The sort of person who notices things before they become problems. 11 days before February 19th, Greta submitted a maintenance request about a loose access panel in the corridor beside the adult male enclosures. She had noticed it shifting during a feeding session and reported it the same day. Like many requests at the facility, it disappeared into a backlog of problems competing for limited time and money. In the days leading up to that morning, A dominance conflict between two adult males had been steadily escalating. Staff noted it in their logs, but nothing prompted a change in procedure. Volunteer access to the corridor remained unrestricted. Nobody connected the conflict to the loose panel. Nobody connected either of them to Greta's Wednesday shift. She arrived that morning the same way she always did. Signed in, checked the board, and headed to restock supplies in the corridor beside the male enclosures. It was a routine task she had performed countless times before. What she didn't know was that the two issues she had separately flagged, the panel and the conflict, were on a collision course. The tension between the males had been building since the morning feeding. By the time Greta entered the corridor, one of them was repeatedly slamming into the enclosure wall with enough force to shake the surrounding structure. After several impacts, the access panel Greta had reported 11 days earlier finally gave way. The bolts had been loosening for weeks. That morning, they failed completely. The second male pushed through the opening into the corridor. He was not looking for Greta. He was in a full charge display, moving fast, and she was standing directly in his path. The impact threw her sideways into the opposite wall. She hit it hard, shoulder first, then the left side of her head. Before she could go down, he struck her again, once across the chest and once more to the left side of the head, and then he redirected back toward the enclosure opening. Greta was on the floor and unconscious before the animal was back through the panel. Nothing about this could have happened if someone had acted on the report 11 days earlier. That's the whole point of maintenance requests. Staff found her 4 minutes later when they came to investigate the noise. She was breathing, but unresponsive. Emergency responders were called immediately. She was transported to a medical facility and died the following morning without regaining consciousness. The coroner ruled the death accidental, citing blunt force trauma, 4 fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and a head injury with subdural hemorrhage consistent with repeated high-force impact against a hard surface. Contributing factors included the unsecured panel, the escalating conflict between the two males, and the maintenance request that had sat unaddressed for 11 days. Evidence recovered included Greta's original maintenance report, staff behavioral logs, the volunteer sign-in sheet, and photographs of the dislodged panel taken at the scene. The same panel she had flagged herself. The cruelest part of Greta's case is not that she was ignored. It is that she was right. At a privately owned facility in rural Tennessee, a part-time caretaker was bitten twice during a health check she had not been trained for and treated the wounds herself with what was in the first aid kit. It was October 8, 2013. A small, private, exotic animal facility on a rural property in Central Florida housed a mix of primates and large birds. It wasn't a sanctuary, and it wasn't open to the public. With just 2 full-time staff members and a part-time caretaker, the operation ran largely on routine and familiarity. Cassiana Morello was 29 years old. She had been working at the facility for 8 months, handling feeding rounds, enclosure cleaning, and routine animal monitoring. Calm, methodical, and reliable, she had never experienced a single issue with any of the animals in her care. The 12-year-old male chimpanzee in the main primate building had been at the facility for 4 years and had never shown aggression toward a staff member. That morning, a visiting veterinarian arrived for a routine health exam. The facility's primary animal handler had called in sick. The veterinarian needed help, and Cassiana was the only staff member available. Assisting with restraint wasn't part of her normal duties. She had never helped with a veterinary exam before, and had no real sense of how an animal might react under that kind of handling. Still, she agreed without hesitation. It's difficult to fault her for that. When the only person asking for help is the veterinarian, no doesn't feel like the obvious answer. The exam began without any problems. The veterinarian worked through the routine checks while Cassiana stood nearby, watching and ready to help if needed. The chimp remained calm throughout. Then came the blood draw. As the veterinarian reached for the chimp's inner arm, he pulled away sharply. His body language changed almost instantly. He began vocalizing, retreating into the corner of the exam space. The veterinarian stayed calm and held position. Cassiana stepped forward to help secure the arm. copying what she had seen the primary handler do during previous procedures. The chimp redirected immediately. He bit down between her right thumb and index finger, then lunged again and caught her left forearm. The second bite lasted only a few seconds before he released. Cassiana stepped back. The veterinarian moved between them, and the exam was over. The wounds were cleaned with the facility's first aid kit. They looked serious but not life-threatening. Deep punctures, tearing along the forearm, and bruising around the hand. No antibiotics were given. The veterinarian documented the incident and left. Cassiana finished her shift and drove home. What neither she nor the facility fully appreciated was how quickly a serious infection could take hold. Chimp bites carry a heavy bacterial load, and once bacteria reach damaged tissue, the process can move faster than people expect. Over the next several days, the wounds became increasingly painful and swollen. By October 13th, Cassiana had developed a high fever and was struggling with fatigue and chills. She assumed she was coming down with an illness unrelated to the bite and delayed seeking treatment. Her condition continued to worsen throughout the week. On the morning of October 17th, a family member found her severely ill and called for emergency assistance. She was transported to a medical facility where she died the following day from complications of overwhelming infection. More than anything else, I think about how long the warning signs had to build before anyone realized how serious the situation had become. The coroner listed sepsis as the cause of death, citing a severe polymicrobial infection originating from the chimp bite wounds. Laboratory testing identified multiple bacterial organisms consistent with primate oral flora. Contributing factors included inadequate initial wound treatment, no prophylactic antibiotics administered on the day of the bite, and a prolonged delay in seeking medical care. Evidence recovered included the veterinary visit log documenting the incident, the facility's first aid kit with used bandaging materials, and the incident form completed by the veterinarian on the day of the bite. Hers is the kind of case that makes you think twice about every minor injury you have ever brushed off. In rural Kentucky, an overnight maintenance contractor who had never seen the animals housed in that facility was working alone at 2 in the morning when one of them got out. It was August 22, 2021. A private primate research facility in rural Tennessee relied on a contracted crew for its Wednesday night cleaning rotation. 2 locked corridor doors separated the maintenance area from the wing housing 6 adult chimpanzees. The rule was simple: keep them locked. It existed for a reason. Elmhar Rackford was 44 years old. She had been working the Wednesday night cleaning shift at the facility for 5 months through a private contractor. By all accounts, she was dependable, kept to herself, and rarely attracted attention. She arrived at 10 each evening, worked until around 4 in the morning, and left before the day staff arrived. In 5 months, she had never entered the animal wing or seen the chimpanzees housed there. She knew the building the way any cleaner knows a building. The layout, the supply closets, which floors took longer to dry. To her, it was just a building. The maintenance crew and animal staff operated almost entirely separately. There was no system for sharing behavioral logs or animal reports with contractors because nobody had ever imagined a situation where that information would matter. The 2 sides of the facility existed in the same building but rarely intersected. I don't think Elmhar would have described herself as someone who worked with animals at all. Earlier that evening, staff had documented that one adult male chimpanzee had been unusually agitated since feeding, pacing, vocalizing, and ignoring the usual settling routine. The note remained in the animal wing office. Nobody outside that office saw it. Elmhar started her shift the same way she always did. At some point, she propped open the first corridor door to move her cleaning cart through. The second door, which should have latched behind her, never fully caught. It looked closed. It wasn't. What happened next wasn't the result of a single catastrophic mistake. It was an agitated animal, a door that failed to latch, and 2 groups of people working in the same building without ever needing to communicate. Separately, none of those things seemed especially important. Together, they became fatal. I think this is the story that makes me appreciate how much of daily life depends on systems quietly doing their job. At approximately 2:14 a.m., a motion sensor in the secondary corridor registered movement. The agitated male had been working at the unlatched door for some time. Eventually, it opened. Elmhar was at the far end of the corridor with both earbuds in, mopping with her back to the door. She never heard it open. She never heard him enter. The first contact came from behind. He grabbed her by the shoulders and drove her face down into the floor. Evidence later showed she fought back, managing to roll partially onto her side during the struggle. The chimp remained on top of her, biting and striking at her head and neck while pinning her against the floor. The struggle lasted somewhere between 60 and 90 seconds before the movement stopped. There was no one else in the building, no one to hear it, no one to call for help. Morning staff found her at 6:40 a.m. when they arrived for work. She was still in the corridor, her mop handle several feet away. Both earbuds remained in place. The gap between the 2:14 motion sensor alert and the start of the morning shift was the rest of her night. I think this one hits me differently than the others. There's something especially sad about a person disappearing into an ordinary work shift and never coming home from it. The coroner ruled the death asphyxiation associated with neck trauma, airway injury, and prolonged restraint against the floor during the attack. Contributing factors included the unlatched door, the lack of communication regarding the animal's condition, and the fact that Elmhar was working alone overnight. Evidence recovered included the motion sensor logs, the contractor sign-in sheet, the displaced mop handle, and the behavioral report that never left the animal wing office.